Okay, this is Jonathan Sriranganathan, and I'm having a chat today with Liam Parry, who is the newly announced kind of first candidate for the Queensland Socialists. Liam is going to be running in the state by-election for the seat of Stafford, and I just thought it'd be interesting, it'd be like a timely moment to have a chat about what the Queensland Socialists stand for, how they differ from the Queensland Greens, kind of teasing out the strategic or policy differences a little bit and kind of understanding what this means for Queensland politics and particularly what it means for the Greens in Queensland. I should acknowledge that I'm still a Queensland Greens member, so I'm not a spokesperson for the Queensland Greens, but I'm a party member and I campaign for the Greens. So there's no pretense of objectivity here. I'm not pretending to be like an independent journalist. I have my own views and biases, which I'm sure will come through in the questions. So yeah, hopefully it's a productive discussion. Um, Liam, I might just ask you to start by introducing yourself. Tell us about who you are, where you live, what do you do for work or study, and how do you get involved in political activism?
Cool. Yep, my name's Liam. I've been a long time involved in socialist politics and activism since 2013. Been involved in all sorts of campaigns like protesting against university fee increases and deregulation of university fees. But the last few years, I've really been prioritizing Palestine activism, just because, it's clear like the most important issue really of our time, I feel. Yeah, I was a student. I'm currently working like as a researcher, and I live in Indooroopilly.
Yeah, cool. What field do you research in?
It's a whole range of different stuff. So it's with like Red Flag newspaper,
Yeah,
just like a
cool.
socialist newspaper.
Yeah, awesome. So I guess first question is basically what do you see as the differences between what the Queensland Greens are calling for and what Queensland Socialists are calling for? And I might just for a bit of context for people who are listening or watching this, when the Victorian Socialists formed down in Victoria, I could see that there was a real like need for a strong left-wing political force because, in my view, the Victorian Greens over the last few years have been a bit more conservative, centrist, less radical than I'd suggest the Queensland Greens have been. So the Queensland Greens have been increasingly shifting towards a more robust social democratic vision, and I wondered why it was taking a lot longer for the Queensland Socialists to get off the ground, and I wondered if that was partly because the Queensland Greens were perceived by some people as a little bit more left wing than say the Victorian Greens. But so that's kind of why I'm interested in like yeah, what are the main differences? Not so much in how the Greens use power, we can come to that, but in terms of what the Greens call for in policy and statements, what are some of the big differences between Queensland Greens and Queensland Socialists?
Well, I guess it'd be like a bunch of kind of yeah, like there are like legitimate agreements and stuff that we have. Like, I mean, I think the Greens have taken in general a very good position on Palestine since the genocide and since October 7 and stuff. And then yeah, like I think a lot of the kind of things that the Greens have advocated for and called for, are really supportable. I suppose for us, a difference would be like we really want to more be explicitly anti-capitalist and sort of foreground that in the way we talk about what needs to happen because I just think, so that's different from social democracy, I guess, when in the sense of like, wanting to reform and negotiate a better kind of deal within capitalism. I think we much more want to be starting a conversation in Queensland and around Australia that like actually capitalism as a social system that puts profit ahead of human life, that's fundamentally wrong, and we need to be trying to build a total alternative rather than
Mm.
kind of negotiating within it.
And I think a lot of Greens members would probably agree with you on that, but you're right that the Greens don't just say that on the label. Like the Greens kind of downplay that anti-capitalist critique. And I reckon if journalists were to say to one of the Greens MPs, "So, do you want to end capitalism?" Some of those Greens MPs would be like, "No, no, no, we just want to make changes." Others might say yes. So there's like a real a mix of views in the Greens, both among the members and the MPs. But like the party rhetoric is nowhere near that strong in terms of our campaign materials.
Yeah, totally.
So do you think you'll put that on the flyer and stuff, like or like on the maybe on the website videos or whatever?
Yeah, my flyer is going to say capitalism is screwing workers and the poor.
Awesome.
So I think, yeah, we need to call it out for like what the real source of all of these inequalities is. That it's not just like I don't think it's right to just say see all these problems as just being about like the Labour and Liberal have the wrong policies.
Mm.
But it's actually that the whole structure of society is built around prioritizing profit, and that's really fundamentally harmful. I think there are other differences as well. Like, like in the last federal campaign, I was pretty critical of parts of the Greens that emphasized like wanting to work with Labour.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of can be really misleading for people who are left wing to think, oh, well, the strat solution is to kind of like negotiate with Labour.
Mm.
When I think really we've got to say like we've got to fight Labour, and I think
And be like,
that
Labour is a right-wing party now, and
yeah,
stop, yeah,
totally,
stop doing brand repair for them. Yeah.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah. We'll come to that
yeah,
more because I think that's a really interesting, like that
mm,
rhetorical question of how and strategic question of how
mm.
left parties are in towards the majors. Are there any other particular policies at the state level that the Queensland Greens have taken where you're like, that was the wrong line on this? Or I guess I should preface this by saying you're a very new party and you probably don't yet have a fully detailed policy platform.
Mm.
But yeah, is there anything that the Queensland Greens have done lately where you've been like, that was the wrong call?
Well, I think yeah, I would also be critical of the way that the Greens have been talking about the Olympics in Brisbane.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
like um like I think a lot of the way that is being talked about is like we need to make the Olympics work for working class people and ordinary people. But if you look at the history of the Olympics, that's basically never been the case. And I think it can be a misleading thing to kind of say, we could have it different in Brisbane when in every city the Olympics wreaks havoc on, on working class communities. It involves always the destruction of like public space and yeah, like real like, and we're considering there's a big housing crisis in Australia, in Brisbane, and it's worse in Brisbane than any other city in terms
Mm.
of like rents are actually increasing faster here than anywhere else. I think we should basically be saying cancel the Olympics and spend all that money. Don't build a bloody stadium on Indigenous land. But spend that money instead on building public housing. And obviously, the Greens also oppose
The
the stadium
stadium and want to build more public
yeah,
housing. Yeah, but they're not taking
totally.
that very strong line of being like cancel the Olympics altogether.
Yeah.
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 And so just can I ask on the policy stuff, like my impression of the Victorian Socialists is that they didn't have a fully fleshed out and detailed policy platform on every issue, and it was more about presenting a broader critique of the status quo and sort of sketching out an alternative vision, which I have a lot of sympathy for. Like I don't necessarily think left-wing parties have to have detailed policies on every issue. And that sometimes it can be a mistake to provide that really fine-grained policy detail because then you end up just trying to reform capitalism and saying, okay, well, what's going to be palatable to the current system rather than that broader transformative vision. Do you think like is the goal to have a fully like a comprehensive policy platform? Maybe not for the by-election, but is that where you're heading, or is it more like we don't want to get bogged down in policy nitty-gritty, we just want to go for the broader critique and theoretical vision? Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah. Well, in Victoria, in the last few elections in Victorian Socialists, there kind of has been more moves towards a set of policies to kind
Mm.
of argue for. And certainly, like, I'm not against having policies in that,
Yeah.
because you kind of have to, like, and in some ways, policies can be important because it can expose how rotten and crap the mainstream parties are. That you can say, well, here's a bunch of things you could do right now,
Mm.
based on the amount of wealth in Australian capitalism. You could take that wealth and you put it to good use in the
Mm.
immediate future. And
And they put
yeah,
flesh on the bones, right? Like, because you can
totally,
have this
yeah,
sort of theoretical rhetoric of like, well, we want a society that works for ordinary people. You have to be like, well, what would this look like? Oh, here's
yeah,
our idea for childcare. Here's our idea for free education, etc.
totally, yeah.
Okay.
So some of the stuff we raised in Victoria was like, I mean, it's not even necessarily that these things are the main things that we were, every day talking to on every doorstep or whatever, but like, things like we should build state banks to like provide people interest-free like loans, so that like people don't have to be in the private banking system to have a house, or like
Mm.
even just things like that, and also like really comprehensive argument for nationalizing heaps of industry and taking back utilities into public ownership, and building public housing instead of affordable housing and all the crap
Yeah.
always they use to avoid actually building any good public housing.
Well, since you bring it up, I think that idea of a public bank is really interesting because the Greens have been calling for a public bank too. And whereas, say, Socialist Alliance at the federal level have said we just need to nationalize all the banks or like, so I wonder, do you see yourself as being slightly less radical than Socialist Alliance at the policy level? Like you guys are talking for setting up a public bank rather than like nationalizing the whole thing, or is that
Hmm.
sort of a minor discrepancy?
Look, I haven't really. I mean, there's obviously also differences in terms of what policies you take to a state election versus
Yeah,
a
for
federal
sure.
election.
Yeah.
So, the where in Victoria we have had more fleshed out stuff, it's in the state level because that's
Yeah.
the election that we're kind of able to contest through more meaningfully, I guess.
Mm.
But yeah, I don't consider that we're like, less radical than Socialist Alliance. I just haven't really like
No, that's
had much
fine.
of a chance to like compare the policies exactly and kind of see what I think about the differences and similarities and stuff.
Yeah, cool. I have one more question about Socialist Alliance, but I'll come back to that later. Just
Yeah.
on the broader like strategy stuff, like both looking with Stafford and thinking broader ahead. Like you obviously know you're not going to win seats immediately or in the very near future. Is your goal to sort of concentrate on some key seats and try to win in areas where you're strong, or is it more like we're going to run everywhere? We might spread our resources a little bit thinly, but we're just about using the platform of elections to get our ideas out there. We want to broaden the parameters of debate. We'd rather grow the vote everywhere across Queensland rather than win a couple of seats in key areas. Like, which way are you guys sort of leaning at the moment?
Hmm. Well, it's pretty far out from the state election, I guess. So,
Yeah,
I feel like we haven't really properly figured that out. But,
sure.
I mean, in general, I'd be for us trying to run in as many places as we can, seriously. But I think within that, we would pick particular places to contest. So in Victoria, like in Melbourne, when we set up, I used to live in Melbourne, so I was part
Hmm.
of helping establish Victorian Socialists and helping to organize parts of the first few campaigns. And we decided we wanted to run in both like kind of left seats or like things that were considered the left, like inner city, young seats with like high renters and stuff like that, but also run in outer suburban working class seats.
Mm.
Because we think, like we actually really want to build socialist politics as a force in the working class population as well. So I would be for trying to do that in Brisbane. It's just, like given that the election is still what, two
Yes.
years
Yeah,
away?
yeah.
Yes, it
Too
probably
early to
depends
make
on.
that strategic call. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah,
I mean, I find it a really interesting one because the Greens, both in Victoria and Queensland, and I think generally, have increasingly said, let's focus on key seats so we can get some people into Parliament. And then once we've got people elected, we have a platform, we have a bigger reach, so then we can spread the message more widely. And I have some sympathy with that argument because I think for a while there, the Greens used to focus on just growing the Senate vote, and we would put almost as much resources into campaigning in like Longreach as we did in say West End. Not quite, but that meant that the vote was growing everywhere, but we never actually cracked through and won a seat. Whereas once we started aggressively concentrating resources in key seats, we actually got some people elected. And yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I'll be interested to see how Queensland Socialists grapples with that over the coming years.
yeah, totally.
Related question is about like elections where there's optional preferential voting. So, like in Brisbane City Council, you don't have to number every box, whereas in the state and federal elections, when you go to vote, you number every box. And with compulsory preferential voting, that means that people, if there's lots of left wing parties running, they're not really splitting the vote because someone might vote one socialist, two Greens, or like one legalized cannabis, two Greens, and the votes will still flow. Whereas in an optional preferential voting, some people might see the socialists on the ballot paper and they'll just vote one for the socialists and not number any other boxes. And that might actually, for example, hurt the Greens' chances of winning a seat in a key marginal contest. So I think you told me off camera that you were thinking you probably would run candidates in the upcoming council election, and how you're
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
navigate that.
I can't see why we wouldn't. I mean,
Yeah.
like I think the split the vote argument can just be used to justify not running and not presenting, competing politics in any,
Yeah,
like people say
and
that about the Greens as well.
Labor
Yeah.
always used to run that argument about the Greens. So yeah,
Totally, yeah.
yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it's just like we want to be able to offer everybody, an opportunity to vote for an open, explicit socialist, and someone who's calling out capitalism and stuff. So, yeah, like I don't think we would consider like those elections as different, or like we would be less likely to run in them.
Mm,
Again, it's far out, and we would have to make kind of a collective decision about where to run and stuff. But my opinion would be strongly to contest everywhere we can. And yeah, because we want to fight for like, and we do want to seriously build explicit like socialist voice, I guess. So
yeah. And okay, that makes sense. This next question might feel like it's going into the weeds a little bit, but I know some people who read my stuff will be interested in it. So like at the national level and in some states, we already have a longer running, somewhat established party called Socialist Alliance. They're not registered as a party in Queensland, but they do run candidates nationally. And I think I've seen public statements from Victorian socialists suggesting that there are no obvious major differences between policy goals of Socialist Alliance and Vic Socialists. And you've kind of sort of said the same thing, that you don't see them as radically different. So I guess I'm wondering, why start a new political party instead of joining Socialist Alliance? Like here in Queensland, instead of recruiting members from scratch, you could have just encouraged people to join Socialist Alliance and get them registered as a state party. So do you think is it that Socialist Alliance kind of has a branding problem, like they've just been around for a while and they're a bit stale, or is it and they just didn't have enough momentum, or are there deeper ideological differences between Socialist Alliance and your party that might not be obvious to outsiders? Like I know there's been a lot of talk about how originally Victorian Socialists was formed out of an alliance between Socialist Alternative and Socialist Alliance and other independent socialist groupings. And then later Socialist Alliance kind of broke away from that. But why not just join Socialist Alliance if the politics are kind of the same?
Mm. Well, I mean, I guess like in Victoria, like we have actually proved, I think, that we're able to get a much higher vote than Socialist Alliance in most of the places we run. And we also like, I mean, worth saying, like we want to we've had a whole bunch of arrangements where we, like in the last election,
Don't undermine each other. Don't run against
yeah,
their candidates. Yeah,
and we
yeah.
want to work out some way to like cooperate because part of that is that actually we've been arguing that like Socialist Alliance
Should join you
should
guys.
join
Yeah,
us, yeah.
yeah.
Which I mean, like, yeah, in a whole bunch of places, Socialist Alliance isn't registered as a party. We're about to be registered. Actually, this by-election has like frustratingly postponed our registration.
Oh.
So it's like we're actually in the final stages now of registering as a party, but now that's kind of yeah postponed until after the election.
So you're going to have to run as
But
an independent on the ballot paper to
yes,
start
yeah.
it. Yeah, right.
Yeah, for
Okay.
this one. But all of my advertising will have like, Queensland Socialists on it and stuff like that. It's unfortunate, but
Mm.
yeah, so we're very close in Queensland, and in a bunch of other places. I don't know. I mean, yeah, you could always say like, why don't you join one group or another? But I think we're pretty like at this stage, I think we're in a better spot to build a bigger profile through like the Socialists, which is kind of the national branding or whatever of it.
Mm.
Partly, but based off their success in Victoria, and then like when we actually expanded nationally just last year, and already have like within a few days had there'd been like a couple of thousand people join online, and so I think that's a bit of a sign.
Undeniably, there's momentum. Yeah, and I
Yeah,
mean,
totally.
personally, I think that's a lot to do with like Jordan running in Victoria and like the profile he brought.
Yeah,
I'm
agreed.
going to put this critique to you. It's not. I don't have an opinion on this. I'm sort of still making up my mind about it all. But like, I've heard it said that um, Queensland Socialists, Vic Socialists, etc., are very heavily influenced by Socialist Alternative. I know you're a Socialist Alternative member, and I have my reservations about Socialist Alternative. I think sometimes maybe they do more harm than good to the movement. We can have a separate conversation about that. But like, is it the case that Socialist Alternative is kind of the main block behind Queensland Socialists? Like roughly what proportion of people involved in Queensland Socialists would be Socialist Alternative members? And is that part of the reason that Socialist Alliance wouldn't get on board?
Um, well, I mean, you probably have to ask Socialist Alliance why they wouldn't get on board. I think they
Sure.
should have
Yeah.
got on board, basically.
Yeah.
So the actual membership of Socialist Alternative is a minority. I think in every branch
Hmm.
of the party. In some places we don't have, like in Tasmania, for instance, there's no Socialist Alternative branch, but there is Tasmanian Socialists,
Okay.
and that's the same in the Northern Territory as well. So yeah, like it's very really open, like in terms of like the Socialist Party, we want to expand everywhere, and we're happy to work alongside. Well, I'm in Socialist Alternative, and I'm really happy and want to encourage any socialist to get involved and show some like leadership and initiative in setting up structures and branches and stuff around the place.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I don't think that that's going to be like a super straightforward process necessarily. There'll be all sorts of like, things to figure out, but
Yeah.
I think it's really promising to see that there's a lot of initiative. And then just in terms of yeah, in Queensland, like we're I think we've got around 800 members of Queensland Socialists now, and within that, like maybe 10% Socialist Alternative members.
Okay.
We did have a founding conference. Can be different in terms of like who's really active, obviously.
Yes. Yeah.
We're very active, like the Socialist Alternative members. Um, but like we
Would
had,
you
for
guys
instance,
have a majority on like the key decision-making committees? I don't even know what they are, but
yeah.
like, is there like a campaign committee or a management committee, and does Socialist Alternative have a majority of seats on that?
Yeah, we've got an executive that was elected at a conference, our founding conference that we had last year. And so just to say, at the conference, we were also a minority.
Yeah.
So there was like more non-socialist alternative than socialist alternative members. But I think, well, we were elected. The elections to the kind of executive, the did give Socialist Alternative a majority. I can't remember the exact percentage or whatever, but it includes both non-Socialist Alternative and
Yeah.
Socialist Alternative members.
I'm not alleging that it's just a
No,
front
no,
for
yeah,
salt,
for sure.
but
I
yeah.
just want to say, like, we do have that majority, but it's based on being elected by non-socialist alternative
I
members as
get you.
well. So, like, and we don't want to just like have an arbitrary control over the party by any means. Like, I think that would be illegitimate, but we want to
Hmm.
actually, fight for positions and arguments and about what we think the party should look like or what it should do. We want to do that in a really open way. And yeah, like we
Does
want
that
what
mean, sorry, this is really technical now, but does that mean like Socialist Alternative members might discuss as a block what they think the party should do before they come to like a party conference or a party meeting? Like it's almost like a faction, the way, say, factions in other parties work? Or would Socialist Alternative members openly take disagreeing views about strategy and policy in an open um,
yeah,
Queensland Socialist meeting? Does that make
both
sense?
of those things can and do happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, like and with the we think it's an important democratic right to have internal groupings. And so
Mm.
we're not the only internal grouping either within the Socialists. So there's also a grouping called the Communist Caucus. In Victoria, there was a grouping that's now become a kind of a structural part of the party, but it was called the Socialist Workers Caucus, and now it's become
Like a
kind of
working
more of an
group or
official part of the thing. But that was
cool.
the internal grouping initially, and yeah, I think that's like a kind of like that's a fundamental democratic right that people should have within a
Mm.
party. But yeah, that doesn't mean that we always agree, and there's disagreements and debates in any grouping, I think.
Yeah,
But yeah, like also there are important points of agreement and
of
yeah.
course. And because like this is something that like in the Greens we generally make decisions, theoretically at least, through consensus-based processes, and which has pros and cons because sometimes it means that like one or two people blocking consensus can really delay or slow down reaching a decision on something. Do you guys make decisions through consensus or through majority voting?
It's a majority vote, yeah. And
Yeah,
it's like one member, one vote is the
yeah,
principles of our party and stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Once we're registered, we'll like our constitution will be
Has to go
published
online.
online and
Yeah,
stuff. So yeah, like people can have a read of it. But yeah, the basic things are like democratic principles of majority vote, public discussion, and then yeah, then we have like leaderships that have, a level of decision making power, but they have to be democratically elected and
yeah.
and that kind of thing.
Which brings me to one of the spaces where I think the Greens have been most at risk of co-option, which is that the Greens have really robust processes for consensus-based, like kind of working groups to decide what the party policy is at state level, at federal level, even at the local level for Brisbane City Council. Like our policies will be developed by branch members putting in their ideas, workshopping them. They get taken to state council. They vote like they check for consensus. Occasionally, if there's not full consensus, it eventually goes to a majority vote. But going to like a majority vote is sometimes sort of seen as a failure of
Hmm.
good facilitation. So there's always this like very long, slow process of consensus-based decision making to develop policy. But I would argue the more significant decisions are how the party exercises power in Parliament. And so we have those consensus-based policy platforms, but when it comes to MPs deciding whether they'll support a Labor bill, yes or no, the membership is kind of sidelined and doesn't have as much influence on that. So I know you guys are a long way from holding balance of power or even having elected reps at state or federal legislatures, but and this is probably a question the party hasn't answered, but for you personally, do you imagine that if you were an MP and you had balance of power and you had a choice, like Labor's offering some reformist bill that has some good bits and some bad bits, but arguably voting in favour of the bill will de-escalate the social pressure for bigger changes on that issue, how would you make that decision? Like, would you say, well, we don't want to let perfect be the enemy of the good, better just vote for the minor reform and keep pushing for bigger changes later? Or would you say, we're not going to support Labor, we don't want to prop up this thing, let's just vote against everything Labor does, even if there are some good bits? Or, like, is that a decision that all the members get involved in, or is it just something that the elected reps would do? Have you guys thought through that stuff much yet?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to judge these things really concretely and in
Yeah.
terms of like
Yeah, that's hypothetical on top of
yeah,
hypothetical. It's
yeah,
a
but
bit
it does
hard.
come up. So, for instance, like, I mean, I again, like, that kind of criticism I would have of the Greens is that voting for the HAF, and a bunch of the environment bills, and like the whole thing about like perfect being the enemy of the good. I kind of think you have to have something good first,
Yeah.
for that to actually be a meaningful question. And a lot of the time, what's presented as good is actually just crap in the status quo and doesn't actually meaningfully shift anything. So,
Yeah.
in those instances, I think it's really important to really resist the framing of these things as like about that there's like some progress when there's actually none, especially around the environment. I think some of the environment bills have just been really atrocious from Labor, basically. And I think, yeah, I agree with what you said in terms of like it can de-escalate and mislead people into thinking that there's a victory when there's a defeat, really. Yeah, and so I think in general, we'd have to be pretty hard-headed about taking positions because one of the ways that it can be pressure is that people in the general population can buy into the narrative of
Yeah.
what Labour's presenting as something, but I kind of think my attitude is that we want to be a hardened militant minority, and have to take positions that even when they're not popular, but we have to do it based on our principles and what is actually we think is actually a genuine step forward. And sometimes that might mean taking positions that are unpopular. Although, I think in some of those cases that I raised, it actually probably could have been popular if you'd argued for, more blocking of the. You could
Yeah,
have found the audience for it,
make the
maybe.
case for blocking and
Yeah.
then yeah, defend the
Yeah,
position.
totally.
So how does your party make those decisions? Is it just up to the MPs and their staffers, or is it every time you're going to vote in Parliament on a bill where you have balance of power that you have to go back to the membership and seek the majority like view from the members?
Yeah, I don't think we've got this totally worked out yet, and we're
No.
pretty open to different kind of ways to figure that out. But like one thing, I think a principle actually would be having party leadership that isn't just the electoral members, that has the ability to try to discipline electoral members if they, vote the wrong way or like,
Mm.
do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
yeah. So like, I think you would pretty much, um, yeah, like have an elected because sometimes it isn't really feasible to just have like an all discussion of all members, but we
Yeah.
do have elected leadership that's meant to represent the views of the party, and they should be able to have some input over votes in Parliament. But yeah,
Interesting. Yeah. See, because the Greens have like we have a parliamentary liaison committee, and that includes some members who are not MPs or staffers. And then we have like a management committee that's non-MPs. And so there are these other leadership groups within the party that theoretically have influence over the MPs. But at the end of the day, there's not many ways to discipline an MP, like except for refusing to pre-select them. So all the members who are angry at the MP could say, well, we're not going to vote for you to run again in 3 or 4 years. But beyond that, like it really comes down to a problem of how do you micromanage an elected rep? Because if an elected rep is working full time and they have staffers working full time, a bunch of say volunteer committee members who are on like executive committee or policy committee or whatever, they just don't have time to closely supervise and direct the MPs, or at least that's sort of been the experience across different state and federal Greens parties. So yeah, I'll be really interested to see how you guys work that out. Because for me, like right now, I don't see a lot of I don't see anything structural or anything like in the DNA of Vic Socialists or sort of the emergent Queensland Socialists. I don't see anything that's going to insulate you from the same co-opt-in forces that the Greens have somewhat succumbed to. So I'm interested in what you think about that because basically what seems to happen over time is that in order to win seats and then hold seats, Greens MPs or Green strategists and staffers will tend to adopt a slightly more moderate position, or as we talked about, they'll vote for a bill that's a long way from perfect because they think the broader public wants them to support the incremental reform. And so they'll make those decisions one by one, and gradually the party gets dragged back towards the centre or maintaining the status quo. Um, and the membership might be more radical, but there's not a mechanism in place to stop that happening. So I guess like, and we've seen this with socialist parties around the world. Like there are lots of countries where socialist parties are in coalition government or have even held majorities at times, and they still end up kind of selling out or maintaining
Yeah.
the system. So is there, do you think there's anything, can you point to anything that's going to be in the party's constitution or anything like structural or material that's going to stop Queensland Socialist MPs selling out in the way that progressive MPs often do over time?
Yeah, I guess I would say that like there we recognize that there would be like various pressures put on elected MPs. And so one of the things we have kind of established as a policy is that any elected MP would only take the wage of like a public servant, public sector
Awesome.
worker. But that obviously doesn't get rid of every
No.
conservative pressure. But like, I think it is a reasonable thing to say that like, well, if you're getting like 250,000 plus a year, how can you really relate to the struggles that like a teacher or a nurse would face?
Mm.
And you should, like, why should politicians be able to give themselves bloody pay rises while they refuse, preach wage restraints for
Yeah.
teachers and nurses? But I actually think that so like we do recognize some of those structural things. I kind of think that another thing we try to do is encourage an active membership that's active not just in elections, but like we like have contingents at every rally and encourage members to come to protests, as well as that like have tried to get our members active in their trade unions, and that's more like that's a process that's happened more in Victoria, but our members are part of arguing for and trying to organize like working class power outside of Parliament, and I think that can act as a counter pressure. But I also just think that some of the structural questions actually often end up not being the key things. Because for me, I think the
It's about
main
culture as well, right? And
and
ideology.
politics and what's the
Yeah.
strategy and stuff. So I think a
Mm.
lot of the examples of like left-wing parties getting elected and then, becoming crap establishment, forces, a lot of the time that's because they think that you can just get a better deal by negotiating within the status quo. And so I also think that it matters what the politics of the people you're electing is.
Mm.
And so, like there's obviously more left wing and right wing, like MPs and stuff in the Greens or in other political parties. But I think for socialists, our kind of starting point would be that like we want to use Parliament as a way to call out the capitalist system and encourage people to get more active in every sphere of society and not just see these things as being solved through Parliament. So I think
Mm.
part of it's also about making a political argument to people that you shouldn't just like well, you shouldn't just accept what parliamentarians do as like the
Yeah.
be all end all, obviously, but we should try to build real social power outside of parliament and
Mm.
particularly working class power because unions and strikes and stuff, I think that's the only real social power that we can build for our side that could actually start to match and overcome the power of billionaires and corporations.
Yeah. Yeah. I like, and I have a lot of sympathy for that argument. I think I still think it's a little naive or I don't know. It doesn't satisfy me fully as an answer because like I would argue that there's lots of Greens members who also go to protests. There's lots of Greens members who are also active in their unions and in other community groups and social groups. But having members who are really active in lots of different spaces and who are also simultaneously active within their branches and within policy committees and stuff, that alone hasn't been enough to fully insulate Greens MPs against some level of capture. But really, at a broader level, the Greens are still in the position of mostly holding true to principles and not winning many seats. So, like, if there's that old choice between like compromising a lot to win seats and win power versus holding true to your principles and not compromising too often, the Greens are probably still in that stage of like staying small and not winning over mass voters. I mean, people could argue for all sorts of reasons what the limitations of the Greens' electoral strategy has been, but yeah, I guess I just wonder like, is it at some point, if you're making that choice between, well, we need to moderate our message to win over more voters, or do we stick to our core message and values, even if it ostracizes voters? And it sounds like what you're saying is like we would rather stick to our core message and happily just stay on 5% of the primary vote and hope that gradually we can convince more people of our ideas rather than like moderating and sanitizing the message to be more palatable in order to win seats. Is that kind of the thinking?
Yeah, well, I mean, if we got 5% of the vote nationally for a
You'd be thrilled.
explicitly anti-capitalist party, that would be a game changer in Australian politics, I think,
Mm,
because that would be like people, our elected MPs would be like railing against capitalist, the system, trying to like be, yeah, quite radical, I think.
mm.
And there are examples of that. Because why don't so you wanted to ask a question about are there parties internationally that
Yeah.
there are some examples, not very many, but like there are really big, very radical socialist parties in Argentina that they get, like between 6 to 7% of the vote. But that's part of like building a radical left in society as well. And so it's not just about them being able to then make policies, but they use that support to try to galvanize, arguments in the trade unions for strikes against the far right government and like so, because it's not just that like people are active in their unions as individuals, but that we all have a kind of an argument that we're pushing towards, which is for
Mm,
more radical disruption of the status quo in the system. And I think there could be a lot, well, that's something that we want to really build to make socialist politics a force organized by a party, but where people kind of coordinate their arguments and social movements as well, but like crucially the unions because we
mm,
really need to transform politics in the unions that where people less want to just negotiate with the government and actually have some bloody strikes and build and exercise working class power rather than just like waiting for the politicians to fix it for us. So
mm,
that's like I think a really like we obviously do want to run in elections and see that as really important, but that's also we see that as very linked towards building like an active fighting socialist movement in the unions and in the working class in general.
yeah. I mean, I see the logic of it. It's like it's exciting. So, but you right now, there's like an Argentinian sort of grouping that's getting 6 or 7%. I think neither you nor I can point to any really left-wing political parties around the world that have won power or won a lot of seats without selling out. Is that right? Like you can't point, there's nowhere in the world where you can say, here's a socialist political party that's got control of a legislature and they're doing good things. Like they all kind of end up compromising and selling out in order to win more seats, right?
Well, I mean, that's the kind of, I mean, I personally think we need a revolution and you
Hmm.
couldn't really just control the legislature within a capitalist state and then
Yeah.
just use it for the working class, I guess. So I
Mm.
guess I'm not super surprised that there aren't all these examples of it. I think, if there was a real, I think a lot of these questions are going to be worked out in the class struggle rather than just getting control of a legislative body or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think the reality is we're in a situation around the world where the radical left is weak. And in terms of like parties that have been able to seriously build mass forces on a kind of radical left basis, a lot of them have kind of fallen for the same tricks. The same kind of like mistakes as like trying to negotiate, trying to find a place within the system. Something of like Syriza in Greece or
Mm-mm.
like Podemos in Spain, and kind of as. But I think a lot of that is really to do with a strategic thing rather than just a structural thing. Obviously, the structures are related to your politics, but if you don't have the politics that says, we need to build working class power outside of parliament as well as within it or whatever. If you don't have that starting point, I think that's the big thing that's leading to a lot of betrayals and
Yeah.
co-optation and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I think those examples you point to are really valid because I was feeling the same thing about like these groups that looked like they had so much promise and then once they get into power they just sort of slot into maintaining the status quo. But your comments about like the class struggle make me wonder how much Vic Socialists, Queensland Socialists have thought about the tensions between like a class first analysis as distinct from, say, an anti-colonial analysis. And like a tangible example of this tension is that there might be a lot of socialists, and certainly there's a lot of people in the Greens who would say that the mineral wealth of Australia, like the resources under the ground, belong collectively to all of us. We shouldn't have private mining companies digging them up and not paying any royalties. We should all collectively own that wealth, and to the extent that it's mined, we should use the revenue to fund public housing and other social services. And that's sort of a kind of common socialist or lefty position. Whereas some people would argue that actually those resources don't belong to all of us. They belong to the Aboriginal groups on whose land they're found or under whose land they're found. So do you guys, are you sort of more like the Greens of like mineral wealth belongs to everyone, or does it belong specifically to Aboriginal people?
Um,
If you haven't thought
well,
about this
yeah,
before,
yeah.
that's fine. Just say like
Yeah,
I,
totally. I mean,
yeah,
because it almost is almost like a kind of, I think one of the problems is sometimes these questions play out in terms of like capitalist ownership and like
yeah,
how do we determine who owns something or whatever. Whereas
yeah.
like, I don't know, I want to get rid of the idea that like, and actually like indigenous societies didn't really have a concept of like ownership where you could just exclude resources from someone else or whatever. Like,
Mm.
um, so yeah, like, I mean,
Well,
I think
because
that,
I
yeah,
asked the
yeah,
question, I asked the question because like there are examples, particularly of
yeah.
South American situations where you've had left-wing governments that are ostensibly quite progressive, but they end up in conflict with Indigenous people, where
Yeah.
the left-wing government wants to extract like oil or gold or whatever, like copper. There are these, big controversial mining
Yeah, yeah,
projects, and they have a good intention of like we just want to fund public housing or make the buses free or whatever, and the indigenous people are saying no, don't dig up our land, we want to protect this, and that can be a really, yeah, like I don't think I haven't seen anything from the socialists in Australia sort of teasing out or
Hmm.
unpacking that tension. Like
Yeah,
looking at some
totally.
of Socialist Alliance's commentary, they seem to lean more towards we would just say, okay, if Indigenous people don't want that mined, we just won't touch it, even if
No,
we
I think I
forego
would
that
agree
wealth.
with that. Yeah,
Yeah.
like and in the case of like Latin American countries like, like the Lula government in Brazil or whatever,
Mm,
like totally side with the indigenous people. Like they shouldn't have their land fucking destroyed for the interests of mining corporations because actually the majority of the wealth doesn't really go to like working class Brazilians either in those
no.
instances. So um but that's kind of the way the government sometimes positions it, but that's kind of false. And I think it would be wrong for workers in Australia or anywhere else to kind of think, oh, well, we need to destroy Indigenous land for our own interests. Like that's just, it's so wrong. And I don't think like working class people are the primary beneficiaries. And
Mm,
instead, it would be better if workers said, fuck the mining corporations. We side with the Aboriginal,
yeah.
freedom fighters and, we want to, so I think that would be better for the class struggle. So yeah, I think I kind of think I don't agree. Like people kind of sort of talk about class first in a way that means you don't talk about social questions. But in my opinion, I think class struggle it leads you to like anti-racist and pro-Aboriginal and pro-Indigenous positions because
Mm,
like that to me is what class struggle is about. It's about solidarity and opposing oppression in general. And there are a whole bunch of things, even just like old trade union slogans of like touch one, touch all. Well, that means social questions as well. And yeah, I think it's also, I mean, worth saying as well that the working class is just so multiracial and not a kind of ethnic, not white workers
yeah.
in like overalls or whatever. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, I think it's really important to see class struggle as aggressively campaigning for all of these sorts of issues. And yeah, the specific thing about like I think I mean really like there's so much mining just needs to be gone for just for an environmental perspective, like
Mm.
and we need to really seriously restructure all of production in a way that doesn't just destroy like so I don't have a totally worked out position about like
No.
how do we produce everything, but
But yeah,
yeah,
and this was one of the interesting divergences between, say, the older communist parties and socialist parties and the Greens when the Greens emerged, is that the Greens had a very strong ecological critique, which is like it's
yeah,
not just about nationalizing assets or nationalizing the means of production. It's also about fundamentally transforming how we live so that we're not endlessly extracting non-renewable
yeah, too.
resources. And it sounds like you're kind of on the same page with that. I guess if maybe we should wrap this up soon. That this has been a fascinating conversation. Like in terms of tactics, this is not about you specifically, but like my impression of like socialist alternative and a lot of younger kind of socialists or lefty inclined people is that often they're very preachy, and this is criticism I have of a lot of Greens campaigners as well. But like I'm interested to imagine what it's going to be like when you guys go out, say, door knocking or campaigning to the average voter in the Stafford by-election. Like, I've seen the way some SALT campaigners engage with uni students on campus, and it's often very antagonistic. It's like, you're wrong for believing this. You haven't thought enough about. I'm not saying you're all like that, but like, I'm just like, are you guys going to do a good job of convincing people to change their mind, or are you just kind of preaching to the converted and hoping that you can build enough of a base like that? Do you want to tell us a little bit about like campaign tactics and approach to political discussions with people who aren't yet on board? Like, are you if you're at the door and you're talking to someone, they're expressing sort of racist ideas about migration, will you challenge them directly and say, well, no, I think you're wrong? Or will you be like, oh, well, maybe we should think about redistribution and kind of skirt around the racism? That's a hypothetical example, but to the broader question, do you guys
Yeah.
have much of a view on how you're going to campaign?
Well, I think that question about racism is really important now
Mm,
when we see the rise of One Nation and just the
yeah,
kind of like rotten demonizing of migration and stuff. I think it's pretty important to pretty openly say we don't agree with it, and like,
yeah,
and that is our strategy. It doesn't necessarily have to be just this like kind of um like we actually just we would want to be upfront that we have an argument to make and
mm,
we're, not driven by just like tailing the more kind of backwards ideas that people have, but we actually want to say, well, we don't agree with the framing of all of this question where it's, kind of the because the implication of the migration stuff is that there's not enough money to go around, and so if there's a migrant comes, then they're taking from you or whatever, and that's bullshit. Like
yeah,
and I think we should be saying that on the door on the doorstep, like whatever in a way that's like but in a way that's serious, and because we want to be, I think we really need to challenge racism very directly in Australia. Like it's a huge issue, and it's getting a lot worse, with the rise of the far right all around the world. And we're not going to be able to beat the far right unless we do really openly and directly say, I don't agree, that migrants are to blame. That's what the billionaires want you to think.
mm,
Like the billionaires would love it if everybody blamed migration. But
yeah,
instead, we should support migrants and work together with them. They're our comrades in, class struggle and not our enemies. And I think, yeah, I think that it's obviously it's a new skill for a new party to figure out how to like speak to voters and speak to an audience that we don't interact with a whole lot.
mm,
Haven't before. It was a big learning experience for me in Victoria when we were first starting to run in elections. But I think it's something that we can build over time. And yeah, like I think we have really proved in Victoria that we can build a base. It's not like we're not about to get a majority of the vote in Melbourne,
yeah,
but there's big parts of Melbourne where we get there actually are some booths where we've gotten 50% before, but we're talking single booths. But
sure.
like there's parts of Melbourne where we get 20% of the vote.
Mm.
Yeah, like some council elections in I think they've been the most recent
But
ones in
but
Victoria.
do you think that's partly just because the Victorian Greens are a bit more conservative, or do you see a distinction between Queensland Greens and Victorian Greens? And do you think you'll have that same cut through up here, or do you think
Um,
there's not that much difference between the state Greens parties from where you sit?
well, yeah.
I won't be offended by either
No, no,
answer. But
totally. Yeah. Like, no, I'm just thinking about it because there obviously is, there have been a bunch of Queensland Greens people that have positioned in a more left-wing way. Like, like Max obviously like
mm,
wanted to politicize the housing question. I thought your mayoral campaign was, much more left-wing than most Greens campaigns.
sure, thanks.
In the case of uh, like Max, though, I mean, in the end, he did vote for the housing, the half thing, and kind of sold that as a victory. When I wouldn't agree with that, I wouldn't
Yeah,
characterize it that way. But yeah. So I think that there's a space for a socialist and openly anti-capitalist voice here in Queensland as well, and
yeah.
I want to build that basically. And part of that means an argument, that the Greens don't go far enough, and
Mm.
we're not going to pull punches on that. Like, we're just going to say what we believe and let people make up their minds. But I think that there will be an appetite for it here. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Look, this has been a really great discussion. Is there anything else you feel like you want to put on the radar? Are there any particular issues coming up in the Stafford by-election that you're like, this is what we want to make the election about? Like, obviously, you were arrested recently, challenging the LNP's anti-free speech laws. Like, is
Yeah.
that the thing you're going to put on the flyer, or are you going to try and to find the issues that people on the ground really care about the most?
Well, sometimes you don't have space in the flyer to describe everything that's happened to
Yeah.
me and stuff,
Yeah, exactly.
but supporting Palestine is on there as well. And I think that's super important, especially given that the state government is so directly attacking the Palestine movement.
So
Um,
what are the kind of like the top three or top five messages going to be that you're like sending out to voters in Stafford,
yeah.
whether online or printed materials or whatever?
Yeah, totally. I think housing crisis,
Mhm.
like actually in Stafford, every single suburb, the median house price is over $1 million. It's like
Yeah, it's
1.2
crazy.
million is like the lowest. So it's
Mm.
totally like it's people are getting in totally unmanageable levels of debt to just live in, their like neighborhood basically. Like
Including a
yeah.
lot of, particularly in the suburb of Stafford, a lot of housing that used to be public housing, which has been sold off
Yeah,
and is now being, yeah, now selling on the private market for over 1 million. Okay, so
totally.
housing, mentioned in Palestine. What else is kind of like core to the
Well,
message?
I do actually. I really want to highlight the Baramban Victoria Park thing because it's not in the electorate of Safford, but it's right next to it. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's just a total disgrace that like the government wants to spend billions of dollars, and we know it's going to be way more than what they're saying it is. Like the
Mm.
cost of this that should be built to help people, and so they should instead of spending that money, they should spend it on bloody giving teachers and nurses a pay rise and.
Yeah.
So I think talking about that and wages and stuff, like the government is the biggest, like, is a key employer in some of the biggest industries. It should be giving people a serious pay rise. And, we want to support the unions that are fighting for that as well. So,
And there'd be a lot of Greens members who'd say, well, still by far the biggest, most concerning issue is global warming and fossil fuel burning fossil fuels.
mm.
Is that something that you're going to center in your campaign, or is your read that like unfortunately there's just not enough voters who care about that right now, and so we're not going to talk about climate change as a kind of key message on the front?
Mm. Well, yeah, it kind of feels like the environment has been a bit out of the spotlight, unfortunately, for a few years, probably since the pandemic, really. I want to feature it in the campaign for sure. And yeah, like I don't know. I mean, partly destroying a huge amount of green space as well is an environmental question in the Victoria Park thing.
Mm,
Brisbane's like we're kind of lucky to have more green space than a lot of other cities. Like when in Melbourne, moving here was really notable. And I
mm,
think we need to protect those green spaces. But yeah, like I don't know. Yeah, Um, I think it would be really important for a socialist in parliament to fight really solidly against the mining industry, which has just got so much power in Queensland. So yeah, like we should be shutting down the coal mines basically. Like
mm. But
the
you're not going to say that in your materials, or
we're still kind of working out. Like
sure,
I only
yeah,
figured it out. Like we only kind of made the solid decision last week. So I
yeah.
think we're going to figure out probably in the campaigning course of campaigning how to balance all these issues because there's just obviously a million things to emphasize and talk about. But yeah, like we should have like I mean I'm committed to like making some really serious environmental demands and stuff in the course of the election. Just yes,
Cool.
that's still some of that stuff in
Yeah,
terms of
it's
like
early
how we
days.
prioritize the things. We are still working it out.
Yeah.
We have
We
our
re
first volunteer campaigning this Saturday, so
Cool.
we'll probably figure about a bunch of that stuff kind of collectively. I think.
Awesome. Well, best of luck with the campaign, Liam. Thanks for
Thanks, Johnny.
the chat, and we'll see you out on the streets.
Thanks so much. Yeah, see ya.